There was a time when driving meant being completely in control. Cars demanded your full attention and real skill. A road trip was an adventure, not just time between destinations. If you learned to drive before the 1980s, you remember what made it different. If you did not, it is worth understanding what we used to feel behind the wheel. The years before 1980 were the last era when driving felt truly mechanical. You and the car worked together. Every journey required involvement, not just supervision. By the end of this, you will understand why so many drivers still miss that connection, even now. Before power steering, driving demanded physical effort, real effort. Steering required strength, especially at low speeds. You turned the wheel hand over hand, and you felt the resistance. You felt the road through your arms. Parking took muscle. Parallel parking meant serious work. You cranked the wheel, using your whole upper body. Women often asked for help, not because they could not drive, but because wrestling a car into a tight spot genuinely required strength. That physical connection meant something. You felt what the car was doing, every bump, every change in the road surface. The feedback came straight through the steering wheel to your hands. Brakes were different too. There were no anti-lock systems, no computer assistance, just hydraulic pressure and your foot. You learned to modulate, to pump the brakes if you started to skid, to anticipate stops well in advance. In rain or snow, you respected the physics. You knew exactly how much pressure would lock the wheels. You developed a feel for it, a sensitivity. You became part of the braking system, not just someone pushing a pedal. And shifting. Most cars had manual transmissions, 3 on the tree, 4 on the floor. You matched engine speed to road speed yourself. You listened to the engine. You felt the vibration. You knew exactly when to shift by sound and sensation. Starting on a hill meant coordination. Clutch, brake, gas, all at once. You rolled back a few inches while you found the balance point. Everyone did. It was normal, expected. The car behind you left space because they understood. That created real competence. You could not just get in and go. You had to know what you were doing, and if you did not, it showed immediately. The cars themselves were simpler, carbureted engines, points and condensers, mechanical fuel pumps, no computers, no sensors, no diagnostic codes. When something went wrong, you could often figure it out. Pop the hood, look, listen. A missing sound, a loose wire, a cracked hose. Many problems announced themselves clearly. People carried tools, a basic socket set, screwdrivers, pliers, electrical tape. Roadside repairs were common, possible, sometimes necessary. You learned basic maintenance, how to change oil, how to replace spark plugs, how to adjust a carburetor, not because you were a mechanic, because you were a driver. That's what drivers did. Gas stations were different. Full service was standard. An attendant came out, pumped your gas, checked your oil, checked your tire pressure, and washed your windshield. All of it, every time. You did not get out of the car. You rolled down your window and told them what you needed. They did the rest. $5 might fill your tank, and you got service that made you feel like a valued customer. The attendants knew cars. They would notice things. A belt that looked worn, a tire that was low. They would tell you not to upsell, just to help, because they took pride in their work. Finding your way meant real navigation. Paper maps and road atlases. You planned your route before you left, traced it with your finger, and noted the highway numbers, the major towns, and the approximate distances. Once you were driving, you navigated by landmarks, by road signs, and by your own sense of direction. You paid attention, watched for your exit, and counted the miles. If you got lost, you stopped and asked for directions at a gas station or at a store. People gave you guidance. Turn left at the Red Barn. Go 2 miles past the church. Take the third right after the bridge. Those directions worked because people knew their area. They could picture the route, describe it in human terms, and you could follow it because you were paying attention to the world around you. Road trips had a different rhythm. You did not look up the fastest route. You chose roads that looked interesting, roads that went through towns instead of around them, roads that showed you something worth seeing. You stopped more often, for gas, for food, for rest. There was no pressure to optimize, to shave minutes off your time. You were traveling, not just transporting yourself. Roadside attractions mattered. Diners, lookout points, historical markers. You would see a sign, get curious, pull over, stretch your legs, and see what was there. Those stops broke up the monotony and made the journey part of the experience. You met people, saw things, and collected memories that had nothing to do with your destination. Highway driving felt different. Most cars did not have cruise control, so you maintained speed with your foot, making constant small adjustments. Driving required active participation. On long straight roads, you could rest your foot and let the speed drift slightly. Then you would speed up, then slow down. It could feel meditative, engaging without being stressful. You were always doing something. Passing took planning and judgment. You watched the car ahead, checked your mirror, looked over your shoulder, and when it was clear, you pulled out. You accelerated past, then pulled back in. There were no sensors to tell you if someone was in your blind spot. You eliminated the blind spot by looking, by moving your head, by being aware of every vehicle around you. That constant responsibility kept you alert and present. You could not zone out, and you could not rely on warnings. You were responsible for knowing what was happening in all directions. Cars had personality, real personality. Different makes felt completely different. They drove differently, and they sounded different. Even the same model from different years had character. You knew your car, its quirks and its tendencies, how it handled when it was cold, where it pulled slightly to one side, the exact pressure on the gas needed to avoid flooding the engine. That knowledge was personal, intimate. You and that car had a relationship. You learned each other, and you adapted to each other. It was not just transportation, it was your car. Breakdowns happened regularly. You did not call for help immediately. You tried to figure it out. You opened the hood. You jiggled wires. You checked connections. You waited for the engine to cool. Sometimes you fixed it. Sometimes you did not. But you tried. Other drivers stopped to help. They pulled over without being asked. They offered tools, advice, and a ride to the nearest phone. That help was freely given and expected. You would do the same for someone else. It was part of being on the road together, part of the unspoken community of drivers. Winter driving required real skill, no traction control, no stability systems, just you, the car, and the conditions. You learned to feel when the car started to slide, how to steer into the slide, and how to regain control without overcorrecting. You carried supplies, a blanket, a shovel, sand or kitty litter for traction, jumper cables, and a flashlight. Getting stuck meant dealing with it yourself until help arrived. Help might take a while, so you prepared. You respected the weather. You left early, drove slowly, and accepted that some trips would take twice as long as planned. Night driving was darker, much darker. Fewer streetlights, fewer lit signs, just your headlights and the road ahead. High beams were necessary. It was common. You dimmed them for oncoming traffic. They dimmed for you. Your eyes adjusted to the darkness. You learned to see by what little light there was. Stars were visible. The landscape had depth. Driving at night felt different from driving during the day. Cars were not as comfortable. Most had bench seats. Upholstery was vinyl or cloth. There was no lumbar support, no heating, and no cooling. You adjusted yourself, used a cushion if you needed one, and dealt with it. There were no CUP holders. You held your coffee or set it on the seat or the floor. Spills happened. That was life. You cleaned it up and moved on. Windows were manual. You cranked them down and cranked them up. You used the vent windows for airflow, opening them just right to create a breeze without too much wind. AR conditioning existed, but it was optional and expensive. Many cars did not have it. You drove with the windows down, dealt with the heat, and arrived sweaty. Nobody expected otherwise. Music came from the radio. AM radio mostly. FM was growing. You searched for stations manually and you turned the dial. You dealt with static between cities. You lost your station and you found a new one. Some people had 8-track players. Cassettes were coming. You brought tapes and you made mixtapes. You listened to full albums. You could not skip songs easily, so you listened to everything. That made you appreciate music differently. You gave it time. You did not judge a song in 30 seconds. You let it play, and you found things you missed on the first listen. Safety was different. Seatbelts existed, but many people did not use them. They were uncomfortable, awkward, not required by law in most places yet. That would change, but it had not yet. No airbags, no crumple zones, no side impact protection. Cars were solid, heavy, metal. They felt safe because they were substantial, but they were not. Not by modern standards. People understood the risks differently. They accepted them differently. Driving was dangerous. Everyone knew that. You were careful, attentive, defensive. That was your safety system. Speed limits were loosely enforced in many areas. Highways had higher limits, or no limits at all. You drove at a speed that felt appropriate, that matched the conditions, and that your car could handle. Radar detectors were common, and legal in most states. People used them, shared information about speed traps, and flashed headlights to warn oncoming drivers. It was a cat-and-mouse game between drivers and enforcement. By the late 70s, things were starting to change. Emissions controls were being added. Fuel injection was coming. Electronic ignition was replacing points. Cars were getting more complex. The oil crisis had hit. Gas prices had jumped. Efficiency mattered now. Smaller cars were appearing. Japanese imports were gaining market share. American manufacturers were struggling to adapt. But the fundamental experience was still there. The connection, the involvement, the sense that you were driving, not being driven. Here is why that mattered. The difficulty was the point. The years before 1980 were the last era when driving required constant engagement, when you could not rely on systems to do the work, when your skill and attention were the only things keeping you safe. After that, power steering became standard. Automatic transmissions dominated. Electronics took over. Cars became easier, more comfortable, more isolated from the road. So if you drove before the 80s, you experienced something different. The last period when driving was truly mechanical, when you felt everything, controlled everything, when you and the car were partners, not a person and a computer. It was not safer then. It was not more convenient, but it was more engaging, more real, more human. People who drove before the 80s do not usually talk about specific cars they owned. They talk about what driving felt like, the connection, the involvement, the sense of being in control. Because you were in control. Completely. The car did exactly what you told it to do. Nothing more, nothing less. If something went wrong, it was on you to fix it, to handle it, to get yourself home. That built capability. Confidence. A kind of self-reliance that came from knowing you could manage. That you had dealt with problems before and figured them out. There was satisfaction in a long drive. Arriving tired, but accomplished. You had piloted that car for hours, through traffic, through weather, through whatever came up. Your hands, your feet, your decisions. And when you pulled into the driveway, shut off the engine, there was a quiet sense of having done something. Not just arrived, but driven, really driven. The skills you developed lasted. Smooth shifting, precise steering, controlled braking, reading traffic, anticipating problems. Those became automatic, part of who you were. We cannot go back, of course. Cars are safer now, more reliable, more efficient. Those improvements matter. They save lives. They help people. But something was traded away. The tactile connection, the mechanical sympathy, the necessity of skill, the involvement that made every drive an active experience, not a passive one. The driving before 1980 was not perfect. Cars broke down more, used more fuel, polluted more. But they demanded something from you. And in demanding it, they gave you something back. A relationship, a competence, a feeling of genuine, real control. Not simulated control, not assisted control, real control. If you remember those days, you know what that felt like. If you do not, it is hard to explain, but it was real. And it mattered to everyone who experienced it. Because sometimes, the things that require the most from us are the things we remember most clearly.